summer here in Quebec, Canada is slowly ending, and it's normally that time of the year when many great progressive rock albums are being released. Today, I get the opportunity to talk with Phideaux about their brand new release, Infernal, which will be released on October 1st. How are you, Phideaux?
Hey, how are you? Good to meet you, Fred.
Hey, nice to meet you as well. 11 years after the second chapter of the trilogy, 7 years after your last album, Snow Torch, here comes the conclusion of this trilogy, which is called Infernal. Can you tell us a little bit about the album and the concept?
Well, as you said, the album is the third part of a trilogy, and you know, when I made the first two albums, I made them simultaneously, and I knew that I knew one was part one and one was part two, and I knew that the material wasn't finished. It was, still there's more that I would want to say about it. So at the time, I let it be known that these were parts one and two of a trilogy. I didn't really think people would necessarily expect that the next album I would make would be the third part of the trilogy. Of course, that was the expectation. The new album, Infernal, has taken a while to realize, because I didn't want to just make an album and say, okay, this is the third part of the trilogy. I wanted the music to relate to those other two albums, and I wanted the themes and the lyrics and the content to be of the same DNA, of the same family. And the music that I was working on immediately after Doomsday Afternoon, the second album of the trilogy, was now called Number 7. I'm wearing the shirt for Number 7 right now.
Nice shirt.
And thank you very much. The artwork by Linda Rutan Moldowski, who sings in my band. And so we had gotten together as a band to perform after Doomsday Afternoon, and I wanted to make music with that group of 10 people. So I wasn't really thinking of writing an album relating to Doomsday Afternoon. I was thinking more about exploring the people that I had been making music with. So I got a little diverted from the third part, and I genuinely wanted the third part to be definitely for people to say, oh, this is the third part of those two albums. So Infernal, all these years later, now has come to be, and I feel that it really is the conclusion to that trilogy.
The reviews so far are outstanding.
I'm very happy. Thank you.
Everything we hear about, we read about is really outstanding. So congratulations.
Thank you.
But what are the key differences between Infernal and the previous two albums from the trilogy?
Well, the way the first two albums were made, they were written with myself and my drummer Rich Hutchins, and we were in his studio in Brooklyn during the dead of winter for a couple of months, and I had a bunch of song ideas, and we were going through them and examining them and arranging them and figuring out how they would work. And we kind of realized that one album, that of all the material we had, and we hadn't done any new music for a couple of years, so there was a lot of stuff. And it turned out that one of the albums was shorter pieces, and one of the albums seemed to be this long piece that could almost be considered one long song. So I knew that second album would require more contemplation, and I wanted to do something a little different with it. I had an orchestra in mind. I knew a friend of mine who was an orchestrator, and I thought it'd be nice to work with him to make the album a little more epic, a little more soundtrack, a little more theatrical, cinematic. So we worked on the first album, which was shorter songs, a little more rock, a little more direct. And so the new album is a double album, and I was happy to make it a double album. I realized it could be a double album because I had enough material, and I also started to see that it was organizing itself with slightly shorter, more direct pieces on the first disc, and the longer, more cinematic, and perhaps complicated songs on the second disc. So the new album relates to those albums in that it follows that same trajectory of those albums. Musically, I tried to go back to the demos that I had created before those albums. I didn't really want to listen to the albums and say, okay, let me steal some stuff from those, but I wanted to go back to the demos and think about, well, what kinds of chord progressions was I working on at the time? What little bits and pieces didn't end up on the albums that maybe were worth pursuing? So I think the albums connect in musically and certainly lyrically in that way.
Yeah, you've already talked about the delay between the second from the trilogy and Infernal. Any other things that were part of the reasons why it took so long?
Well, there were a couple of factors. One was that we had the great opportunity to perform at Terra Incognita in Quebec, and that was in 2013. The basic tracks for the album were recorded in 2012, and we were in the process of overdubbing vocals and examining arrangements, and we got the opportunity to perform in Canada. And we're not a band that rehearses every week that all live in the same town. We live all across America, which is a very large, wide country. And so we, as you can imagine, from Vancouver to Toronto, we needed to rehearse for that gig, and that took a little bit of the impetus away from getting the album done. And when we were rehearsing for Terra Incognita, we started to play around with some of the arrangements of the songs, and things changed a bit, and we performed some of Infernal at Terra Incognita. So after 2013, when we performed, we then went back to the studio and made changes to the songs we had previously recorded and sort of re-recorded some bits. So 2014 to 2018, I had some work-related issues. Things were changing at my place of employment, and I really needed to focus on that for a while. Plus, also my producer Gabriel, he was doing some other work as well. So it was just harder for us to connect. And I was taking that time to listen to the album, to examine the album, to really get deeply into it and find out ways in which maybe it was not as good as I could be. So there was a lot of revision and a lot of examination over the years afterwards. But there was also some periods of time where we just weren't communicating and connecting on that project. I will say that there were a lot of other projects that I've been working on as well. I have several albums that I'm in the middle of working on that I'm close to the edge of working on, and so sometimes I would spend a couple months working on a different project. So there will be music coming up perhaps more quickly now than there was before.
Okay. Like you mentioned, there's 10 musicians. Was it a challenge to have the exact same lineup, or did it come like naturally?
Well, most of the 10 people are lifelong friends of mine, people I grew up with in a small town back east in New York called Hastings-on-Hudson. So it's not difficult for us to get together because we share so much in common. We all like each other. The other three members of the band, Rich Hutchins, my drummer who I've been working with since like 1995, and Johnny Unicorn, the keyboard player, and Matthew Kennedy, the bass player, they are all a pleasure to work with, so I definitely wanted to work with them again. Getting everyone together, that's a logistical problem, but we had all had such fun performing live, so everyone was willing to participate. It is hard to write music that all 10 people can feel satisfied with their performance or that they are represented on the album. But I feel that everyone made significant contributions, and the album is definitely a product of all those 10 voices. Plus, we have a cellist, Stephanie Fife, who plays on most of our albums, and so she's sort of the unofficial 11th member. She doesn't perform live with us, but she's an integral member. And there were some other people that guest starred a little bit, but yeah.
Okay. You also talked briefly about the Los Angeles Orchestra. Like, what were the challenge coordinating with them?
Well, my friend Paul Rudolph was the guy who did the orchestrations, and he and I worked together for a couple of months where he would create orchestrations and I would come over to his house and make some commentary on them, and we would make a few changes. And once we understood what the orchestrations were, he then just created the score. and he was friends with the guy who does contracting for the Los Angeles Philharmonic, and it was actually quite a pleasurable, easy thing. We got the different groups, the strings, the woodwinds, the brass in, and we just recorded it in, I think, 2 days, and everyone was in the same room, and it was really a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I was surprised at how quickly those orchestra musicians work, and they just nailed it, usually within 1 or 2 takes. And we even created an extra piece on the spot, which is really unusual for an orchestra because they usually prefer the printed words. We were just kind of circling things and saying, try this, but faster. And so it was a lot of creative fun. And the people who played on the album from the LA Philharmonic were all really top-notch, wonderful people and very congenial.
Yeah, and it sounds beautiful on the album.
Thank you.
Very, very, very nice. Can you tell us like anything you had to avoid or change from the last album to Infernal to make Infernal really unique, even though it's part of the trilogy?
You mean from Doomsday Afternoon to Infernal, or from Snow Torch to Infernal? Well, from Snow Torch.
Or even from the first, the two of the trilogy.
Yeah, of the trilogy. Well, Infernal was written in 2000. Doomsday Afternoon was written in 2006.
Yep.
Half of Infernal was written in 2007 as a demo idea, and it was kind of put away for a while. And then the other half was written in 2011 after we had performed at a festival here in the U.S. So a lot of time had passed, and it was kind of, Doomsday Afternoon was sort of hazy in my mind. I really haven't listened to Doomsday Afternoon for many years. I more work on the live versions now, and the band has made changes to the arrangements when we perform live, so that was more in my mind, and I wanted to take those ideas into Infernal. But changing anything about Infernal, Infernal was very long when it was completed. There's about 20 to 30 minutes that were taken off of Infernal just for time, and in some cases just to streamline the song and make it a little more clear and direct. A lot of that music will come out eventually in other packages of Phideaux music. But so I think there were some things I cut that maybe were more that were themes from Doomsday Afternoon that were done in different ways. And like one of the criticisms that I personally have of my album number 7, and I joke about this, is that I feel like it's an album with maybe 2 or 3 songs and a lot of transitions, like a transition into a transition into a transition into a transition into a song, And so there were a couple of moments on Infernal where I thought, the song ends and it goes to this little interlude of music from Doomsday Afternoon redone in a different weird way, and then into another interlude that goes into an interlude that goes into the other song. And in some cases, when playing the album for other people, they were, they felt that I was perhaps being a little too precious with those callbacks. So I really listened to it and thought, Infernal doesn't have to be Infernal with a lot of Doomsday Afternoon on it. It should really be Infernal as its best version of itself. So that was useful to realize that I didn't have to rely on as much of the callbacks, even though there are plenty of them on the album.
Great. As you probably know, lots of people are looking forward to discover new Phideaux material. But how do you personally feel toward the release, which is just a couple weeks from now?
I feel happy that I don't have to listen to it again. I've been listening to it for years now, like a lot, over and over, examining, scrutinizing. And we've had a few, there was a situation where we got new speakers in our studio for mixing, and it really changed the whole color. So we went back and we remixed the whole album, and it sounded a lot better after we remixed it. So that was a couple of weeks of tweaking. So there have been a lot of moments going deep into the weeds with this album. So I'm happy to have a break from it right now. I'm listening to concert recordings from some of our performances in the past, and looking to make a live album. We are scheduled to do some performances next year in May, and I'd like to be able to have a live album for people to get at those performances, because our music sounds very different live often than it sounds in the studio. So that's been great to be able to concentrate on something else that's not Infernal. But how do I feel about the release? I'm really happy. I really can't wait for people to tell me what they think of it, because I think I got too close to it. So I'm curious to know if it worked or not.
Like I feel that you wanted like close to perfection for Infernal. You know, lots of details, lots of work. Like, did you feel any added pressure while writing the songs and recording them?
Well, I mean, I definitely felt pressure because, you know, I was making albums, and, you know, people liked them, and they thought that I had some interesting ideas. And in the progressive rock community, people said, oh, this is not unlike progressive rock. I mean, I'd had a song, Chupacabra, that was 20 minutes, and it was sort of a little bit of a humorous callback to Supper's Ready in certain ways. And so people definitely thought that I had the capacity for progressive rock, but I wasn't really making albums that screamed progressive rock. And so when Doomsday Afternoon came out, and that was very much my mission statement of, this is what I would like to do if I was going to make a progressive rock album, people really said, oh, that we like. This is the album we really like. Make more like this, and when is the next part of the trilogy coming out? So I kind of thought, I had that pressure, which is why I made number 7, and I wanted to have the album have a title that would not make you think this is part of a trilogy. It was like number 7. And so yeah, there was pressure, but I got over that pressure by working on different albums, by making Snow Torch and number 7. So when Infernal came around, the pressure was off a little bit, but I think, and once, I think there's pressure if you have to write an album. When you have an album written and you legitimately recognize it as this is the third part of the trilogy, then it was only as good as, I mean, it was as good as I knew I could do. I couldn't, I mean, I can always do better. I always find a lot that I wish would be different about the album, but this, you know, this was the opportunity to put my best foot forward with regard to the third part of the trilogy. And as an artist, you know, you want to please the audience, but you also want to please yourself.
Yep.
And I am not someone who necessarily is, I mean, there are people who listen to my music, but I'm not on a major record label, so I have the luxury of saying, well, I can make any album I want, and I don't have to worry about if people buy it or not. Even though, with the ego and the vanity that an artist has, you want people to like it. So,
yeah, great answer. Anything planned already, or any possibilities for you guys to be all 10 musicians on stage, like a tour or anything?
well, we are definitely going to be performing, all 10 of us, on stage in Florida in May of 2019 at the Rozfest festival. And we're hoping to get some other gigs. We'd like to come to Quebec. We'd like to come back to Quebec City and perform there. So it's certainly possible that, you know, people can see us up there, hopefully in 2019. And we'd like to go to Europe. We'd like to go back to England. Our first concert ever was in France, and at the Crescendo Festival, and we'd love to go back there. So we may be trying to return to some of our favorite festivals and see if they will have us back. And so fingers crossed for that.
Absolutely. When you first started recording Phideaux songs back in '92, if I'm not mistaken, compared to today, are you happy with all the project evolved? Like, is that what you were like hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, in 1992, I put out, you know, what is I realize now is a collection of demos. It was music that I recorded myself. I mixed myself for the most part, and it doesn't sound very good. And it used technology that, I wasn't a master of. And my singing, I hadn't studied as much with a vocal coach as I since have. And I didn't have a microphone that I liked. So I hear so many imperfections in it. Of course, after my, from Fiendish through Ghost Story through the albums of today, everything has evolved a little bit, and we've gotten better and better and better at making the sound quality match what we have in our hearts and minds. And so yeah, I'm really happy with how it's evolved. There's so much music I want to make, and there's so many styles of music that I love that I enjoy exploring, which is why Phideaux albums have different elements to them from time to time. So I definitely am very pleased with how it's turned out, and I feel like there's more work to be done.
And what about the progressive rock genre? Like, how would you compare it to when you started being involved with progressive rock and today's music in this genre?
Yeah, well, when I started really realizing there was a resurgence of progressive rock music in like 2000, 2001, and was very inspired by that music, and then decided to make my own albums. There were bands that I listened to: Arion, IQ, Dream Theater, Arena, and nowadays there are so many bands that have come out, and I think it's really great because a lot of younger people are putting bands together and making music and morphing a lot of different cross genres. I mean, to me, when I was listening to Dream Theater and progressive metal music, I mean, I hadn't really thought of those two things necessarily being together. I was not an Iron Maiden fan as a kid. If I had been an Iron Maiden fan, I might have realized that those two things go together very well. So, my keyboard player, Johnny Unicorn, he makes albums, and he puts together an eclectic mix of things. It reminds me of Frank Zappa's music, in the sense that Frank Zappa would move between doo-wop music and jazz fusion, and rock, pure rock music, guitar solos. And Johnny Unicorn mixes so many different genres, and his music to me is an example of modern progressive rock that knows no boundaries. So I think maybe when I got back into it, I was trying to have a sound that was maybe more like the 70s, and maybe a little bit like the 80s. I do like my the 80s post-rock music: Susie and the Banshees, Wire, Magazine, The Cure. Those bands that are very simple, but they have a great atmosphere. Joy Division. I love the atmosphere that they create and the mystery. It's not pop music, and so I try to bring that element into my music. But for the most part, I'm working with Jethro Tull, Moody Blues, Genesis, Renaissance. Those are the bands that I grew up loving. And so I think progressive rock these days is a little less tied to those exact bands, which is healthy for it. I still am tied to those bands a little bit. And so some people maybe don't consider me to be very progressive, in that I'm not necessarily progressing music, but I just make the sounds that I want to hear.
Yeah, that's great. We're near the end of the interview. We at Profile like to ask questions that only require one-word answers. So are you willing to play the game? Okay.
Sounds good.
If you want to pass, you just say pass, and we'll move on to the next question. So, what is the last album you've listened to?
Peter Gabriel, One.
One. What is the last album you've purchased?
Richard Thompson, The Bright Lights, or something about I Want the Bright Lights.
Okay. Which instrument do you prefer, guitar or piano?
Piano.
One word to describe Infernal.
Red.
Red. Why is red?
because red is an infernal color of passion and of fire and of hell and of and the last one was white and the one before that was black and we needed a third color and it was called Infernal and I thought, well, you better use red. Or crimson, I'd like to say, probably more crimson.
Okay. What is your favorite Phideaux song from Infernal?
From Hydrogen to Love.
Nice. In average, how long does it take to write one song?
One day.
Oh, one day.
But the lyrics take a lot longer.
Okay.
And sometimes I rewrite the songs after the fact.
Okay. So one day becomes...
Yeah, but usually, I get the idea in one day, and then I have to organize that idea. And one day is 24 hours long.
This one is not easy. How long before the next album?
5 to 6 months.
Wow.
Live
I
album.
love that. Where are the best progressive rock fans located?
England.
England.
Sorry, other countries.
Your favorite album of all time?
Thick as a Brick or Fragile.
Or Fragile. And last question, one song you wish you had written yourself?
Here Comes the Flood.
Wow. Well, Phideaux, I guess this is it. Thank you so much for participating. It was great to talk to you. Infernal will be released on October 1st. That's
the vinyl, and the CD is already out at this point.
Okay, so the vinyl is out on October 1st. Thank you so much, and looking forward to talk to you again maybe in 5-6 months. That would be awesome.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Great to chat.
If you catch them at the station,